Welcome to another edition of Pages Promotions Virtual Book Festival, Autumn 2020. This is a production of Indie Reads TV, and we find our home on CNM TV in Troy, Michigan. And we are very grateful for their opportunity to bring books to you. Today, we're going to be talking with Elizabeth Thomas. If you were here earlier in the month, you know that she read from her book, Arden's Act, which is a really cool story. I can't wait to read it. I got so many books to read. So, where'd I go? There I am. Thank you very much for coming back, Elizabeth. We really appreciate it. I always have questions for authors. My fascination with the writing craft is seemed to be never ending, but I know other people have questions too. But just to get the party started here tonight, I'm going to ask a question. What's the first book you can recall reading that made you cry?
Probably Little Women.
Why? What was it about that book that really touched you?
Well, the death scene basically with Beth, it was one of the first ones I'd read.
Okay.
It was that sad,
About how old were you when you read that?
About 10. My aunt gave it to me for a birthday present.
Okay. I know a lot of us got that book as a birthday present at one time or another. That one and Little House. Lots of us got those when we were younger. Everybody, you can turn on your microphones if you'd like. And this is the time when you get to ask questions, so feel free. Does anyone have questions or comments for Elizabeth?
I have a question.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, is there any point of view that you've written from that's made you uncomfortable, or are there points of view that you shy away from when you're writing? And are there reasons behind that, or places that you may not want to go?
Nice.
I'm assuming you're not talking first, third, and second person. You're talking more from
more along lines of race and gender, just because I've been thinking about questions like that recently.
I understand, and it's interesting. I have some people that I don't really want to write from the viewpoint of, but then there are people that viewpoints that intrigue me, but I'm a little nervous about getting it wrong. I think I would, one of the books I'm planning in the future will have I guess I already am working on a book with a character who's of color, but she's not a major character. Further one down the line, she'll be a major, there'll be another such character of color who will be a major character. And, I just don't want to be perceived as doing it wrong or disrespectfully or anything like that.
Have you thought, Elizabeth, some of the other authors and I have had this conversation, and David, maybe you can speak to this as well. Has anyone considered engaging the services of a sensitivity reader, somebody who is of the ilk that you are writing about, somebody of color, somebody of a different religion, maybe a different creed, that you would give it to them as a sensitivity beta reader to take a look at your work? Is that something that you've thought about or something you've already done?
I haven't already done it, but yeah, I would definitely consider doing that.
Can I chime in there?
Yeah.
I did a series that takes place in Idlewild, Michigan, which was the only Black resort in the nation.
Oh, you're the one who wrote that book. That sounds so cool.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a 3-book series, and it scared me because I am obviously a middle-aged white woman. And I have little experience with the Black community. But I tried to approach it that this book and the imaginations going on here beyond the historical research that I did was from a middle-aged white woman's perspective. And I learned so much on how to use language that didn't scare me anymore. By the time I was done with the series, language didn't scare me, even though I refuse, as I do in all my books, to use language that is harmful to any group of people. But it is a wonderful thing to tackle in your writing career, and different perspectives. I think, David, that's a wonderful question to ask, because it's very scary.
Yeah, I apologize. That was your first question.
No,
Yeah, well,
I would be horrified if somebody asked me that question first. So I apologize.
Well, I'm so glad you asked it. But yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of courage that comes with writing for an audience that you're not 100% in touch with.
Yes.
And I think it takes some reaching out and getting to know people of differences. I think that's super courageous for people to get.
I actually went to Idlewild to give talks to the Idlewild community, which is primarily a Black community. And they brought me in as a speaker to talk with them. And writing wasn't nearly as scary as standing up and speaking to a group of people about their own heritage, their own background. And talk about wanting to look at the eyeballs in there and see if they are angry or accepting, or, you know, if they think it's funny or not. But that's an even scarier experience.
How did that end up? Did that end as a positive experience for you?
They were wonderful.
Fantastic.
Because I gave them their history that I was very serious about researching.
Awesome. Does anyone else have questions for Elizabeth? I have a whole list, but I'm inviting you to open up your brains. Go ahead, David.
So I watched I wasn't present during your reading, but I watched the YouTube replay, and
Thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah. They're always fun. So how do you do, I can't remember if you said this in the question and answer already after your reading, but how did you do history? Like, how did you study? I know that you said that you majored in, you majored in something in college, right? That had to do with the time period, but do you like to read historical novels to kind of get the feel of a language, or is it kind of like?
Very much. I mean, I love to read historical novels, but I did study English language and literature at University of Michigan, and I focused, especially in graduate school, on that time period that our Ardens Act is set in, and I just found the period so interesting. And one of the things about it to me that was interesting is that, to me, the political situation, in some ways very different, but in some ways very similar. There's this, conflict at the time between religion and secularism, and just to see how that all played out in these certain circumstances, I found was interesting.
I have a curious question I'd like to ask people, and that is, when you were writing the villain of your story, what was the most challenging part of writing that negative character? What did you find that posed the biggest obstacle to bringing that character to life?
Yeah, I mean, he was very difficult because I have nothing in common with him at all. It's funny. I'm working on a book now that's more contemporary, and I've got like a white male serial killer in his 30s, and I click a lot better with him than I do with Treadwell in Arden's Act, because he's like very, very fundamentalist, but he's also like a lecher who likes young women, which is another thing I don't really relate to.
Right. So how did you get yourself to get over that hump of difficulty in writing this character? Did you just simply go with imagination, or did you just have research that you were able to fall back on to create this character that you were at odds with? How did you go about doing that?
Well, I guess I wrote him, even though there are times when, you know what, I just realized I did not write one paragraph from his viewpoint. It was all his interactions with the other characters in the story.
So you never actually had to get inside his head?
No, I never did get inside his head.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a challenge for your next book.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ashlyn. You got to turn your microphone on. There you go.
What got you on the path to writing?
Well, I had some great teachers back in grade school who would let us write occasionally, and especially in well, even though I knew by the time I was 9 that I wanted to be a writer, and that was when I was first reading like real chapter books, and I finished one that I really loved, and I didn't have any more books to read, and I realized I could make stories too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was in the 6th grade, we had this great teacher who had creative writing every Tuesday, and we'd take turns, we'd get up and read what we'd written to the rest of the class, and you know, it was great. It was just so much fun.
That's awesome that you had a teacher that inspired you that way. That's very cool. Any other questions for Elizabeth? No? Okay.
Yes, I'm interested in responding a little bit to David's question about perspectives.
Yeah.
I know that when I first started writing, and I'm in my 9th novel right now, but I still think about these perspective issues. But when I was writing Elephant in the Room, I think I revised it 3 different times to come from first person to third person perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered, Elizabeth, did you ever go through that kind of a dilemma about what is the most concrete way to present your work?
Not really. It just seems like it's different for each story. It just the way things start shaping in my head, it'll start in first person or it'll start in third person. It just depends on the story, and I'm not sure why even.
So are you a plotter or a pantser?
More a pantser. I mean, I'll get like a basic idea, but like I'll be not entirely sure how I'm going to fill it in.
Okay.
And I start writing and I just kind of see where it goes from there, and then I fix it.
Yeah, I did a similar thing you did, Julian. I went from first person to third person, and then first person, a different perspective. On my satire, I rewrote it 4 times, and each iteration had a different POV, a different character POV, because I was just looking for who's the right character to tell this story.
Yeah,
that's
and it took me a while to figure out who that character was. Was I telling an overall story, or was it's a story that about heaven and hell? So it was, do I tell it from this third person omniscient kind of thing, or do I tell it from a narrator reporter kind of thing? Do I tell it from first person? So I went through 4 iterations until I finally figured it out.
That's exactly it.
I'm a plotter. I'm a passionate plotter, but until you find the right voice, you can't really flesh out the rest of your plot map.
Yeah. And how many people in that story need to have a filled out story behind them, and you can't do that from a one person perspective. So how many people in this?
But you have to figure out whose voice is louder.
Right.
right? So Elizabeth, with your book, Arden's voice was louder. And so that's why the story is about Arden's act rather than somebody else's act, right?
Although there, there were some other characters that I used for viewpoint, that people who were close to her. So,
right. Anybody else have questions? No? Okay, we'll go back to my list. If you had to give up one creature comfort, one comforting extravagance, one thing that makes your life easier to endure in order to become a better writer, what would be the thing you would willingly give up to do that?
That is really hard for me because I love all my, and it's like if I'm willing to, the one that's what would first occur to me to give up would not be that important, would not be that much of a comfort to me because it's just the way my mind works. It's like, well, what can I
it's kind of like, giving up for Lent, right?
Right.
We're supposed to give up something that we love for Lent. And
Right.
One year somebody said, so you're going to give up chocolate for Lent, right? And I went, what's Lent? No, not doing that. So it's kind of that same kind of a question. What would you give up to be a better writer?
Yeah, I know.
It's a tough one.
I'm betting she already does.
Yeah. Is there something you're already giving up?
Yeah.
Well, it's never something entirely, but I'm certainly giving up. Oh, well, of course, I don't really like them. But my kids are always like, you have to try this. You have to try this game. You have to try this game. And I'm like, no, if I'm gonna like goof off, I'm gonna be writing. Or if I'm gonna be doing something during my leisure, I'm going to be writing. I'm going to.
See, I thought you said you'd give up your kids.
Oh, no. Any kind of like.
You didn't like them that much.
Yeah,
right. The games. I don't like games that much.
I was getting worried, Elizabeth.
I mean, they are grown, but they're more fun now that they're grown, actually.
Yeah, it's amazing.
They're a lot funnier.
Anyone else have questions?
Yeah, I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
I have yet to read the book that the Ardens, is it Ardens Act? Ardens Act. Mm-hmm. But in anything that you've written, we're always building these worlds and you're interested in a particular part and geographical place in history. Do you are there ever texts within the book or, things that characters are reading or plays that they go to see, and are those
yes I thank you for asking that, because I had so much fun, because the theater at that time did a lot of Shakespeare adaptations.
Oh, cool.
And so she would be acting in various Shakespeare plays, and that would get woven into the story. And also a large part of the story turns out to be one of her friends is writing a play and trying to get that play on stage, and there's like a little subtext of what that play is about and how that play is supposed to end and different things like that as well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, we have time for just one more question. Does anybody have a question? No?
I don't want to monopolize, but I do.
Go ahead.
That's fine.
We'll let you.
Okay. Whenever I'm in the editing process, after revision, I go to these lists of words you don't use. I don't know if you're all familiar with them, but they're out there on the internet. Don't use, was, is, all those words.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about those lists that say you're a bad writer if you use them?
Well, I I don't think you're necessarily a bad writer if you don't use them, but I do go through when I edit and try and take out the was's and the were's and things like that. And I try to vary my word choice. Like if I'm using a word like too many times on one page, I'm like, oh, we have to find a synonym for this. And you know, that is definitely part of my editing process.
Yeah, my biggest editorial pet peeve is the word had.
Oh,
Lots of people use it when they don't need to. Just leave it. It's like Mark Twain said, replace very with a swear word and your editor will cut it out, and then the writing will be exactly the way it's supposed to be. So I do the same thing with the word had. You know, there are very few instances where you can use it at work. So that tends to be my biggest note, as Jacob can attest to, because I just finished one of his books and I cut out a bunch of his hads. All right.
How does that change the sentence, Diane?
It depends on the sentence, but what it does is when you have the word had in a sentence in most instances, it makes it a weak modifier. Okay. So whatever the adjective is or the adverb is that comes after it, it makes that word weaker in its readability. So I come from the school of thought that says your writing should be really strong and should be really forward momentum moving kind of, right? Unless you're in a place where you want your reader to catch their breath, everything else needs to be very tight and you don't want weak modifiers. So that's like a big thing. You know, I like to make the text as strong as it can be.
I agree with that.
So that's my thing with the word had.
Okay.
My pet peeve with the word a lot is a whole different conversation. I know. All right. Thank you everybody for coming, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
There is no word a lot.
I know there isn't. That's why it's a pet peeve. Yes. All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming out. Elizabeth, thanks for coming again. And I'm glad that we were able to like dig into your gray matter a little bit. Thanks everyone. And we're doing this again tonight at 7 o'clock and again every day for the rest of the month. So everybody, thanks for coming. Let me see if I can do this. Can I? Oh, see, technology is a bad thing for me. There you are. Elizabeth Thomas, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. Again, your book is Ardens, and I will post another link to it on our Facebook page immediately after our meeting here. So we appreciate that. All right. There we go. Pages Promotions Virtual Book Festival Autumn 2020, a production of Indie Reads TV, and we find our home on CNM TV in Troy, Michigan. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and we'll see you in our next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.